Welcome to B2B Marketers on a Mission, a podcast for B2B marketers that helps you to question the conventional, think differently, disrupt your industry, and take your marketing to new heights. Each week, we talk to B2B marketing experts who share inspirational stories, discuss their thoughts on trending topics, and provide useful marketing tips and recommendations. And now, here's your host and co-founder of Einblick Consulting, Christian Klepp. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the B2B Marketers on a Mission podcast, where you get your weekly dose of B2B marketing insights. This is your host, Christian Klepp, and today I'd like to welcome a guest into the show who is on a mission, and that mission is to help B2B marketers to improve their content strategy for business growth. So coming to us from Cardiff, Wales, don't cheat and Google that, all right? Mr. James Scherer, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Christian. Good to be here. Yeah, it's about 2.5 hours west of London. Look it up on a map. I'm from Seattle originally.
Yeah, great to be connected, James, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So let's just get started, eh? Okay, so James, you're an expert when it comes to B2B content marketing, but for the sake of this interview, let's narrow it down to what we discussed previously, the pillar and post content method. So in our previous discussion, you said something, I would say it's an uncomfortable truth when it comes to B2B content, which is you need to become a big website before you rank big keywords. So can you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, for sure. The idea behind easy ranking is the fact of the matter is it's impossible. We're well beyond the years when throwing a content piece at the wall of Google search engine would make it stick. Like it needs to be amazing content, thought leadership, high quality, but you can do all of those things and still not find success. Ultimately, it's about having a domain that Google sees as respectable and sees as providing value. Now, the key way that we do that is by building momentum and starting with intention with the content strategy, starting slow, starting intelligently, targeting key phrases and creating content that is all about building momentum and building domain authority. The idea kind of behind domain authority is domain ranking, domain authority. Moz came up with it a while ago, but it's basically just the idea that like, here is a single metric that we can kind of use to say this is a domain or a site that Google is seeing as respectable. And this is a level of respectability in Google's eyes. So for instance, one of our clients is money.com. When they came to us, their domain authority was 82. So it's far easier for them to create and rank content than it is for another one of our clients, Early Bird, who came to us and their domain authority was 23. They just had it, they just got it rolling. So with that client, we need to, and with anybody who's like at that early stage, you need to think, okay, what are the key phrases and what content can I create that gets me just on the page, that gets me rolling a little bit? And then once you kind of can follow that strategy of building momentum and targeting lower volume, lower hanging fruit kind of targeted key phrases, can you start to consider, okay, let's go after something a little more competitive. Let's start targeting some of those, those key phrases that our larger competitors are targeting currently. And the pillar and post strategy is a bit of that, which I'm sure we'll get into, but ultimately it's about just understanding that if you are an early stage business and you are trying to succeed with content marketing, there is no real possibility of you doing it right off the bat targeting massively competitive key phrases. You need to have a foundation strategy in place before you can start targeting something that's a little bit more ambitious, for sure.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And I love how you brought up the topic about strategy, which we will get into later. But as you were talking, I was thinking about something and I wanted to ask you about it. And this is almost like SEO 101. But what would you say is a decent domain ranking that people should be looking at, or like a legitimate ranking?
I'll do you one better. Whenever I'm doing content strategy, we have a bit of like a built-in process. And so I ask our researcher to pull key phrases, targeted key phrases based on the client's domain authority. So the cutoff there is pretty much pre 50 and post 50. And you can actually break it up in even more segments. But if your domain authority is currently 50, then you shouldn't really be targeting any kind of key phrases that have a higher KD or higher competitiveness of more than like 30 or 35. Then once you get beyond 50, which is like, and domain authority is all about referring domains, backlinks, and amount of content ranking on for Google. Those kind of are the three primary variables that impact it. So once you get beyond 50 domain authority, then you can start targeting kind of pillar posts, particularly between 35 and 55. And then once you get beyond 70, you can really start targeting with reliable, results, some of those higher competition key phrases that are looking in more like the 65 plus phase. Don't get me wrong, it's possible. You can do it. You can target and you can rank for extremely competitive key phrases with a lower domain authority. But just if you're looking for like what should we be expecting and what are kind of the three tiers of domain authority, I would say that that's a reasonable way to look at it. Sub 50, 50 to 70, 70 plus.
Okay, that's fair enough. You've been in this field for a bit, so you've probably seen it all, but like just list some of the common mistakes and misconceptions that people have when it comes to the pillar and post content method and what should be done to address these.
Sure. So quick breakdown. I'm sure a lot of the listeners are aware of the pillar and post method, or Backlinko, or Brian Dean called it the skyscraper on some sites, and some people call it the cluster method. They're all very closely related. The idea is that you create and publish your most ambitious content, the content that you want to rank for really ambitious key phrases first and foremost, get it indexed, get it live, and then support it with internal linking from additional content related to it. So if you do the complete guide to project management as your pillar piece, targeting the key phrase project management, then your support content would be task planning, task manager, project planning, project manager roles and responsibilities, best practices, that kind of stuff, support content. And only with the creation of both the pillar and the support content will you rank in that category. So with that kind of established, the primary concern, the primary problems I see people do is the most frequent one is that people choose their top most ambitious key phrases that they want to rank for and just like double down and create the most insane articles ever on those subjects. I think it's worth mentioning that your pillars, while they should be the best content you can do, they shouldn't be dissimilar from the support content. They can be a little bit longer simply because the subject matter is probably a little bit larger in scope. So project management needs to be a comprehensive guide, and you need to touch on a lot of stuff in order to do that. But the piece itself shouldn't be massively dissimilar. Don't write a 10,000 word article. Well, since the May-June Google algorithm don't publish more than 3,500 word articles anyway, because we've seen a lot of decline in ranking positions for massive content. But all of your content should look similar. It really should. I mean, you can put a little bit more energy into your pillar pieces from a design perspective, or from a custom images, or maybe do a video or something like that. But it's not like your pillars need to be incredible and your support content can be whatever. It all has to be good. Another side of this, I think is another mistake that people make, is when a lot of businesses do create those massive pillars, they create them within a single category. They want to be known as the project marketing tool or whatever. And so they create massive pillars within that category specifically. Whereas what they could do is they could have an entire category around project management, another category around productivity and productivity tools and how to increase productivity of your business, an entire other category around remote work and hybrid workspaces and how project management enables businesses to succeed in a remote and a hybrid workspace. And then when you have pillars for each one of those categories, you see which Google just naturally seems to vibe with from your business. You create your pillar pieces and your support content within each category and then see what works. And then once you kind of do have an understanding, I'll give you actually an example before we have a client who, they're called Early Bird. They're one of the lower DA sites that we work with to begin with. And we created, we wrote content within 4 categories, because I do pillar and post plus categorization content planning. And we did gifting, financial literacy, like UGMA, UTMA kind of like style, like gifting, student loans, like student kind of financial stuff. And I didn't know which one of the categories was going to work. It turned out that naturally their site just clicked more with Google around the gifting in the gifting space, financial gifting, gift tax, etc. And so we built off of that category and doubled down on it in kind of Q2 and Q3 after seeing what worked in Q1. And going back to my initial point about around the pillar as well, is that like only when their primary pillars really started to get to the second page of Google did we go back in and make sure that they were as good as they possibly could be. Indexing them was the most important thing we could have done in that first quarter. Getting them live, getting them, and they're good, but because the expectation wasn't that they were going to rank on the first page and get significant traffic in the first month or first 3 months, I didn't care so much that they like weren't absolutely incredible. I'd rather that they were indexed early, and that's also an error you see is people who like create everything, with equal priority. Do your pillars first, and then support them after the fact. Indexing is the most important thing. So everything clicked with gifting, and then we were able to double down on that. And in Q3, really like hit home and cover that category. And now we've actually exhausted with them the amount of kind of content opportunities that are there, and we can move on to like doubling down on the other categories, which now have had a little bit of time to start clicking as well. But be dynamic, be versatile, allow your content plan to change, but set it up such that when things happen to naturally click with Google, you can kind of pivot and focus attention on that, on whatever's working. So yeah, kind of a few different errors that I see, but in general, there's a lot of strategies to try to address them and mitigate the risk, I guess, across the board.
Yeah, no, those are some definitely good points. And let me just go back to something you said earlier, and I had 2 follow-up questions. So I know sometimes it's hard to say, but what would you say is the general rule of thumb in terms of the length of the content? Because you said, like, for sure, like nobody has time to read like a piece that's like 10,000 words. But the general rule of thumb would how long would you say it should be?
I mean, it is going to depend on the subject matter. Mm-hmm. I would say the 1250 to 2500. Okay. Depending on scope. If you go above 2,000 words, make sure you're including a table of contents with internal linking down to the headers, which is relatively straightforward, CSS, HTML kind of stuff. And a lot of CMSs now allow that to be like an inbuilt block.
Sure.
What you do want to make sure that if you're going a little bit longer, that you are giving readers the option to navigate to the sections that they're most interested in getting to, and that's going to increase. It's going to decrease bounce rate. It's going to increase time on page because it's actually going to read the thing they want to read. Otherwise, they'll read the first paragraph, not be interested in bounce. And that is an SEO factor.
Absolutely. And this one might be a little bit of a refresher for some of the listeners out there, but you mentioned the importance of indexing. So could you elaborate on that a little bit and why that's so crucial?
Indexing, so essentially indexing, let's just quickly clarify, is the idea that when you publish an article or a URL live to your site, the next time Google crawls your site, it sees it. And that means that the URL is indexed. And you can do it manually within Google Search Console as well, but in general, it's going to be done automatically by Google once every week or two. And the importance of it from an SEO perspective is simply that unless an article is indexed, it can't be seen. And it can't get backlinks, and it can't get internal links, and it can't get referring domains. And so you prioritize the content you want seen most by publishing it first. The other component of this is that you can't support content. You can, of course, you can add internal links to new content from old content. That's fine, but it's easier to create support content knowing the article that you're supporting. So get that up live, get it up first. The other component of indexing is that like age is not an SEO factor. We know that Google doesn't reward URLs for being older. In fact, it kind of caters to new content, kind of. They like to say that they deliver the most complex, the most up-to-date pieces at the top of Google, and that's true to an extent, but there's a lot of stuff on the first page of Google from 2018 that HubSpot wrote. Domain authority and backlinks and referring domains matter far more than recency. That's just the case. So that said, indexing early, getting your pillars up early, gives them the highest chance to build up their own momentum and strengths and backlinks. So that, because especially if we're talking about serious KDs, serious competitiveness here, it may take a year with doing everything that I can possibly recommend you do and creating all the support content in the world. It can, if you're hitting something that's like 65 plus competitiveness, it can still take a year period with the strategy I'm putting in place. Granted, once you get there, we're talking thousands and thousands of visitors a month, if you're talking like seriously, but it may take a sec. So give yourself, do it a year in advance. Then you want to start actually, if you want to like, okay, we have a sales funnel in place now. I'm super glad we published that pillar piece a year ago, because now we can drive traffic into that sales funnel.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's super helpful. So when it comes to the pillar and post content method, you touched on it a bit earlier, but talk to us about the importance of having a strategy and conducting the relevant research before you implement any of that stuff.
Sure. I talk a lot about intention. I talk a lot about content strategies need to have intention. You need to know what you're doing and why you're doing it before you even set foot in Ahrefs or Moz or SEMrush or wherever you're doing your primary research. So I'll quickly run through the strategy that I implement and tell people why I do it this way. It used to be that I would say, all right, let's look for your most ambitious pillar, the key phrases that you want to rank for, and let's create content for them. Now for me, it's what are the categories of content that your product and your service kind of is related to. And if those are the categories, then let's put those up on a Google Sheet or wherever you are, Notion or whatever platform you're using for content planning. And let's start thinking about not just what are the highest, search volume key phrases within these categories, but like, what do we want to talk about as a business? So say it's productivity as a category within your project management, space. You want to talk about so we have a lot of the key phrases you're targeting are related to, search volume, but some of them may be very product oriented, branded type content. Some of it may be like social media oriented content that just talks about, is a listicle that doesn't really target a key phrase, but like is 10 productivity tips for remote workers. Cool article, would do really well on social. So you consider, okay, if this is the category content, let's focus 50% of our attention. This is for like mid-stage businesses. Early stage, probably focus on SEO a little bit more. Mid-stage, 50% of your content focused around driving traffic, and then 25% on bottom of funnel content, case study, examples, product related content, and then 25 related to social. Let's just say that that's kind of the breakdown that we're doing. And then we create kind of the same kind of model for 3 to 5 different categories that we want to be known for. And then within each category, we have 3 to 5 pillars, and then 25 or so support pieces. Some of those being socially oriented, some of them being BOFU oriented, some of them being straight SEO support pieces. So then you have, 3 by 30, you have 90 or 100 odd pieces of content, and that's your first year of publication. You're doing, somewhere around whatever 100 divided by 12 is. I'm sorry, I'm terrible at math, but you're doing that amount of content. And that's your monthly schedule, and you publish the pillar pieces first. You have intention behind each one of them. You know why that's your pillar. Another quick anecdote. Pillars aren't exclusively focused on search volume. We have one of our clients. They do they help students get financial aid, and I identified all the pillars that I thought they should be doing. And they said, sweet, we're cool with 8 out of 10 of these. However, we're going to be getting into the online banking space in the next year. We want to focus on that and I'm like, well, okay, but you're competing with American Express and Capital One and Bank of America. It's incredibly difficult for you, if not impossible for you, a domain of your domain authority, as early stage as you are, who just got their blog live, to reasonably compete with Bank of America within the next year or so, if ever. And they said, it doesn't matter to us. That space isn't so important to our service and our product and who we want to talk to and about, we want to get those articles live so that our team can use them to answer support questions, so that we can repurpose some of the content for social media, so that we can, create other podcast style content. Like we want like those pieces live, whether or not they're targeting high traffic or high search volume key phrases, and whether or not we're actually going to ever rank for them. And I said, okay, those are still your pillars. Those are still your pillar pieces. We'll do everything we can to get them ranking. But for my purposes, from an SEO perspective, I'm not worried about, or they're not worried about them getting to the first page anytime soon. And that's okay. I would say, though, if you're looking to drive traffic from SEO, which you probably are, have those kind of very brand-focused pillars be less than 20% of what you're doing in any given quarter or year.
Okay. Well, those are some really great points. All right. You've already brought up some of these, these tips, but like, give us something actionable here, James. Now, granted, and you said it at least 3 times, as I can recall, this isn't going to happen overnight. But what can B2B content marketers do right now to boost their performance using this pillar and post content method? So tell us about some easy to apply content strategies and the lowest hanging fruit. Off you go.
Okay, interesting. Lowest hanging fruit is not pillar and post, if I'm honest with you. Well, I can talk a little bit about some tips around the pillar and post, and it'll tie together. Essentially, pillar and post, I alluded to this early on, which is the content you publish now doesn't need to be the content that, it doesn't need to look like now what it's going to look like in a year. In fact, please, it shouldn't. In a year from now, you will come back to these pillar pieces and make sure that they are as good as they can be, update them with new stats, and do that every 6 months or so anyway. Add custom images, whatever. You can create good content and make it great once it gets to the first page of Google. That's okay. Supporting intelligently, having a backlinking strategy, and getting a bit of like the good content still ranks. So don't worry about that necessarily. Though it does need to be excellent, but you know what I'm saying. It doesn't need to be like thousands of dollars invested into it necessarily immediately. So that's kind of a quick tip on how to think about content. It's okay. Second tip is the low-hanging fruit component, and that's around optimization. As part of our scope of work with several of our clients, if they come to us and they already have hundreds of blog articles live, rather than recommending exclusively net new content, I often take a look at, I often run a quick content audit, which is extremely straightforward now. It used to be a nightmare, but it's now very helpful because there's a lot of very helpful tools out there. It's very, very easy. And I do an analysis of the URLs that they have ranking between 11th and 30th position for a high volume key phrase. Now, I refer to those as 11s. They are opportunities for optimization that, talking about low-hanging fruit, can send a URL from the second page of Google to the first. Again, we all know that the second page of Google does not get traffic. 9th position and 8th position don't really get a whole lot of traffic. But if you can boost a URL from 11th to 5th, existing content, suddenly you're talking about a whole world of traffic you weren't, exposed to before. How do you do that? Well, there are tools that make it really straightforward. You can drag an existing, one of your existing articles into a tool like Market News or Phrase or ClearScope or SEO Surfer. There's a lot of great tools out there. Drag it into their optimization tool, and it'll spit out basically a score, your content compared to the top 20 search results for the targeted key phrase. And it'll say, your content is a little bit low on word count compared to the competition, and it's missing these key ideas. This subject matter, these semantic key phrases, these secondary key phrases that the ranking content is including. So how about you go back to your existing article, add a section, say again, we're doing project management, add a section on task management, because that's just it seems to be in every single ranking URL in the SERP, and yours doesn't have it. So Google is going to quickly look through all of the the stuff that's targeting it and say you're not meeting the standard that the competition is. And that, do that for your clearest opportunities, the 10 or 15 or 20, whatever, and suddenly you'll get significant traffic. A note on that, though, is around cannibalization, which is a little bit more of a complex topic, but I will mention it really briefly because it can, I don't want to recommend something that people try and they're like, oh, it actually ruined my day. When you do a search, make sure that the URL you're targeting with optimization is not ranking higher for an unrelated key phrase. So the concern is if you optimize for a different key phrase that it's ranking 11th for, then you could cannibalize the higher volume, higher ranking position that it already has. It should be okay. Sorry, it should be okay if they are related enough that cannibalization will be a massive problem. But it's possible that optimization of a new primary key phrase for that URL will cannibalize the existing ranking position, and you could see a drop in it. So the ideal opportunity for optimization is when the primary keyword is the one that it's in 11th for. If the URL is, codeless.io/blog/project-planning, project planning should be the primary key phrase that I'm able to optimize for and move from 11th to 5th. So just be aware of it, be a little bit careful with it. But takeaway there, do not be afraid to update your content frequently and based on its existing performance. Whether it's a pillar that you published a year ago and needs to be updated and is now getting traffic, or it's an article that you published 3 years ago and happens to be in 12th. Don't be afraid to update your content. In fact, maybe spend as much time and energy doing that as creating net new, because it may be a better opportunity for growth.
Thanks so much for sharing that. Do you see that happening a lot though? When clients come to you that they'd rather not go back and review their existing content and instead just create something new?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest issue I see in the content space right now is businesses who are like, we need to be creating content. Our competitors are creating content. We're going to hire a content agency and they're going to create content for us. And, that is a lot of what we do. But what I hope I'm able to bring and we're able to bring is a different perspective on what should you be using your money for within the content space. It is not always, I've talked about this a couple of times in this call, it's not always net new content. It's often optimizations. It's often, BOFU content that doesn't have SEO, positioning. It's often social-oriented content because one of their other marketing KPIs is not just traffic. It's also, we're looking to build up a community. We're looking to build engagement. We're looking to engage on this platform or that community or whatever. So the primary thing I see is people coming with a word count target and me saying, okay, I'm going to scope all your optimizations in terms of word count. It's going to be 750 new words, 250 words worth of work, and custom images will be another 250 words or whatever it is. And they say, okay, fine. But it can take a step to convince them to do it.
Right. You brought up something earlier that I wanted to go back to because I think it's actually quite important. Let's open up your little toolbox there. Well, some of your go-to tools and softwares, if you can share those with the listeners.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, get out a notebook. I'll try to go slow to let you write them down. We use, as a content production agency, we use a lot of different tools. From the content planning perspective, I use Ahrefs. I've also used SEMrush a lot, both of which are great. Moz is also, of course, good. Those are really good platforms. When we're doing kind of keyword content research, that's what we use. When the writers are drafting content, we use, of course, Google Docs exclusively because it allows for multiple people to be in the same doc, client, freelancer, editor, etc. And then the content that they write is brought into a tool like Phrase. We use Phrase, but we've also used MarketMuse in the past and also ClearScope in the past. And we didn't leave because they were bad. We left because we left. So those tools will check the existing content they drop in. The draft they drop in against the competition. You can also, of course, drag in an existing URL and check that. We also use editors use Grammarly to check grammatical errors and errors in general. We use a tool called writer.com, which allows our editorial staff to import a client-specific brand guidelines. and then check content against that, which is a really cool tool. It's really good for agencies, but in-house teams can do that too. It cuts down on the time that it takes to edit, because while we do have client-specific checklists that our editors edit to, being able to import some of those checklists essentially into a tool like writer.com allows us to cut to the chase, and the writer to avoid casual language, avoid M dashes, or be very, very casual, and feel free to cuss, and feel free to use contractions, all that kind of branded stuff that is very important to feel like a content piece is your brain voice. So that's writer.com. We also use a tool called AutoCrit to do plagiarism checks, which is helpful if you're using freelancers, because you don't want to deliver something that's already published. Though Grammarly also has a plagiarism tool. I just found AutoCrits is I trust a little bit more. Then we use project management tools to coordinate the entire process. We use ClickUp, though we have used Pipefy in the past, and also Monday.com we use periodically. Some of our clients use Notion to do content planning, which is a great tool. I am a Google Sheets guy, so that's my bread and butter. And then, of course, we use Loom to film kind of video breakdowns for the writers if a content piece is particularly complicated. We also use a tool called Avoma to record like transcripts and calls, which can be really helpful for in-house teams if you want to get your CEO or your head of marketing or your head of sales or product or whatever on a call to have them go over an idea that they have for a content piece or do a Q&A. Feel free to have one of your freelancers write up some questions, or a writer write up some questions, send it to the whoever expert you have on staff, and Avoma will record both the call and give you a transcript of it. So we also use that for client calls to make sure demos and stuff are recorded for the writer. So we are covered in software all day, every day, and it makes our lives so much easier. I would recommend I would say my top ones would be Ahrefs, Phrase, and Grammarly, but there's a lot of fantastic tools out there.
Just give me a second to catch my breath here. No, that is an exhaustive but comprehensive list. Thanks so much for sharing that. And just speaking of Avoma, I had the pleasure of interviewing the VP of marketing on this podcast as well. So that's a shout out to Yag.
Shout out to Yag.
Yeah. Yeah, so
tool, man. Yeah, that's what we call a tech stack, Christian. That's
yes, indeed.
One of those stacks.
Indeed. Yeah, it's quite the comprehensive stack. So thanks so much for that. This next question, again, you've brought up some of these already, but just give us a list of the top metrics that people should be measuring, right? When we're talking about the pillar post content method, what do they need to set up and track?
Yeah. The answer is not traffic, at least not immediately. The answer is ranking positions by and large. The reason that I would say ranking positions should be your primary metric for content kind of success and content growth is that you want to be really aware of them, whether or not you're saying that they're a success metric or not. They're not just a KPI, they're a metric to be aware of. The reason being that if you start, the internal links from your higher ranking content become more valuable as they climb the SERP. So if you have support URLs that are supporting pillar pieces, or a pillar piece supporting another pillar piece, or vice versa, you want to be aware of where those URLs are within the SERP. From 100 all the way up to first position, which is kind of the what we say is ranking period is 100 north. So if we're saying that, the other side of that is that, so first and foremost, higher ranking URLs are more valuable from an internal linking perspective. They are also, be aware of it for optimization opportunities. I've talked about 11s and the low-hanging fruit. If a URL gets to the second page of Google and isn't quite, and has plateaued there, plateaued being about kind of a month of staying between 3 or 4 positions on the second page of Google, we call that a plateaued URL. That one can then be tweaked, You can, okay, it's almost there. It's almost good enough for Google to rank on the first page of Google, or on the first page. Let's see what we can do to that one. And unless you're tracking keyword metrics really carefully, you can miss that. You can miss the higher ranking URLs that could be giving a lot of really valuable link love to your other content, and you could miss an opportunity for optimization. So that's kind of the first core key metric, and that's still probably the one that I track most frequently. You can also, of course, track domain ranking, domain authority. That one moves a lot more slowly, and frustratingly is based far more on like external links and referring domains than it is on really any other metric. If you have a really good backlinking strategy in place, whether using a backlink agency or whether you have an internal team, whatever, doing it for you, you're going to see your domain authority go up more quickly than just from publishing content. But that's still a metric because it basically says that Google, it's a respectability meter as far as Google's concerned, and they place respectable domains far higher than they do, non-respected domains. So once you kind of have those two, I would say also keeping track of, at the end of the day, traffic is also really helpful. I would say ranking positions and then seeing if those ranking positions are corresponding to traffic within Google Analytics, wherever you're doing your traffic tracking, because not just as like oh sweet, we're getting traffic, but also because traffic is a SEO factor. It is one of the key SEO factors after links and after domain authority, traffic itself. You also want to keep an eye on, if it is getting traffic, then your bounce rates and exit rates and time on page becomes statistically significant. So only when you get, a few hundred visitors to a URL every week can you actually say, oh, the bounce rate actually is 98%. Let's be conscious of that. Let's do something with that. So traffic is a metric not just for success of your content, but also a way for you to strategize and create better content or better site design or a better page experience or whatever it is. So consider all the metrics that you're looking at, not just along the lines of like, this is success, this is failure, but also, is this metric actionable? And all of the metrics that I've talked about are clearly actionable. Ranking positions is actionable because you can optimize content, link it better. Domain authority, domain ranking is actionable because if it's stagnant, but despite the fact that you're ranking more content, you can look into backlinking, and you should do. And traffic is actionable because it allows you to see other important metrics that aren't relevant until you have traffic and can't be trusted until you have traffic. And then when you can see those metrics, you can take action on it. So think about the metrics exclusively when they're actionable. Don't worry about them until they are.
Yeah, no, those are some really great points. And I love how you started it off by saying not traffic first, because that would probably be the most predictable one that people would grab hold on to, right? So, dude,
I'm a content strategist who has like 20 high tier clients. I cannot say, yeah, we're going to be doing this traffic in a month because I'm an SEO. It just doesn't work that way. I have to say,
absolutely not.
Within a year, we should be seeing some good ranking positions. That's my promise.
Yes. No, absolutely. James, man, this has been an incredibly informative conversation. So thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing your expertise and insights with the listeners. So quick intro to yourself and how folks out there can get in touch with you.
For sure. So my name is James Scherer. I'm the VP of Growth at Codeless, though a lot of my time is spent doing client strategy. I can be reached on Twitter at JD Scherer. Though, I mean, honestly, if you're looking to connect, I'm happy to talk about content strategy, do a content audit, whatever. The best place to do that would be to get in touch at codeless.io, Codeless, which is one of those brand names left over from a previous business that we ran. But sure, we all have those. Codeless.io would be the best place to get in touch. Thank you so much, Christian. It was fun.
Fantastic. James, once again, thank you so much. So take care, stay safe, and talk to you soon. Bye for now.